Hello everyone. Last week I was talking about the state of international relations is state of anarchy. Anarchy means the absence of central government, so there's a state of war. So fundamental essence of international relations is state of war. But in reality, not all the countries are in the constant state of war. So fundamental question in the state of anarchy is that why we are still alive. Because there are many attempts by the people to stay alive in the state of anarchy. So this week, I would like to introduce some ways and means to escape from the negative externalities of anarchy and also to mediate them. So the goal of this section helps the students think how to get out of the state of anarchy and or mitigate anarchy. So there were 4 schools of thought after 1945 in order to escape from anarchy. Escape from anarchy. The first is the Harmony of International Interest School. What is the harmony of interest? So let us define the harmony of interest first. The notion of a natural harmony of interests plays a significant role in libertarian thought, liberals' basic idea. The basic idea of harmony of interest is that individual interests are harmonious with the interest of community. So in every society, if individual pursues his or her own interest, and as a result of it, the community as a whole takes the interests. In other words, individual's interest means the interest of the community. How is going to that happen? Let me introduce a little more about the definition of harmony of interest. So in the Western thought of harmony of interest, they thought that improving the general welfare is an unintended consequence of result of self-interested behavior. In other words, if the government exercises a general welfare, also promotes the interests of the individuals. It's the same as the Adam Smith put it, people in the act of following their self-interest, if people pursue their own interests, it's going to end up with the serving the social interest, as if they were guided by an invisible hand. In other words, Adam Smith explained that there was an invisible hand which is going to make the individual interest transcend to the social interest. And we can understand the Adam Smith individual hand could be in the context of Rousseau's The General Will. And Rousseau, a French philosopher, once said that when everyone pursues his own interest, obviously the clash of the interests will occur with other people, right? If everyone pursues his or her own interest in the same business, and their interest will clash. But since the human beings are rational beings, they have rationality. So there emerges the general will which transcends his own interest for the community. And then society gets a harmony of interest and becomes prosperous. So I said there are 4 schools of harmony of interest. And now let me introduce the 2 schools. They are economists. The first set of economists argue that nations should refrain from waging war. In other words, nations should not go to war. Instead, they should engage in trading freely. Those nations must have free trade, because with free trade, each nation will gain much more. In other words, if nations have free trade, they will have peace and stability in the system, and also they get much more out of the interactions. So their slogan was the advantage of not fighting. If you don't fight, if you don't go to war, you will get more benefits. So they say, make trade, not war. So war does not provide you any benefits. So in this case, maybe we can think of this question. If all the countries engage in free trade, all the countries, how could the problems of free riders and unfair traders be solved? In other words, in these days, every country is engaging in free trade now, right? But there are free riders and unfair traders in the world. What I mean by free riders, free ride means if you are engaged in free trade, you must abide by rules for the free trade. In other words, the government must not provide any aids or assistance to the domestic companies, and also domestic companies produce merchandises and sell those merchandise to abroad cheaper price than a domestic price. They are the free riders. And unfair traders means that some countries are taking advantage of the current system. So they manipulate the exchange money and current rates of the exchange money, or they make the invisible tariffs, something like that. So currently the free trade system is maintained by the United States, but there are so many countries are not abiding by some rules and principles of free trade. And how could we do that? How could we solve those kind of problems? I think I can answer this question a lot later in some other section. Second economy school is another liberal economists. And they argue that nations are so interdependent. So no nation can wage war without severe disruptions and ultimate collapse. In other words, if nations go to war and they all end up with disruptions and ultimate collapse. So they stress the disadvantages of fighting, and their slogan is war cannot pay. And also a question rises. Does interdependence of countries cause peace or conflict? This is a really hard question to answer. Let us think about some Western European countries, particularly 3 countries in Benelux area. Those small countries are so closely interdependent, they never had a war against each other. So in this case, interdependence produces peace and stability for the system. But what about East Asia? What about relations between China and Korea and Japan, and Japan and China? Those 3 economies are closely interdependent, but those countries have peace or conflict now? It's really hard to answer this question. So according to the theories of international relations, there are 2 perceptions or perspectives to explain this situation: realists and idealists. I think I mentioned about realism and idealism last week, but I'm going to talk about more about realism and idealism. According to what kind of person you are or what kind of ideology you have, your answer will be different.